Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some excerpts here from an article titled The Evils of Cities and Minority Rule. And, well, it looks like we're going to be tackling some pretty big questions about democracy today.
Yeah, this author definitely doesn't pull any punches. It's a pretty scathing critique of democratic systems and, well, really a challenge to some fundamental ideas about how societies should govern themselves.
For sure. Like, right off the bat, they call democracy satanic.
Whoa.
And then they say it's a form of servitude. They even go so far as to argue that by participating in a democracy, like by voting and stuff, we're actually giving up our freedom.
Huh. Yeah, that's a pretty different take than we usually hear, right? I mean, most people think of democracy as like empowering individuals.
Right. But this author's saying it does the opposite, that it gives more power to the government to, like, control our lives.
And they make this really interesting comparison between democracy and monarchy. Like, they claim a monarch is actually more concerned with the overall well-being of the state, not, with telling people how to live their lives.
Yeah. They even asked this provocative question, would a king care about how much property tax you pay or how long your grass is?
Ooh, interesting point. I guess they're implying that a monarch might be less likely to interfere in our personal lives.
Exactly. They think a monarch would have a different set of priorities.
But, I mean, it's easy to romanticize monarchy, right?
Yeah.
History is full of monarchs who abuse their power, too.
Oh, for sure.
But I get what they're trying to say. I mean, about the potential for government overreach in a democracy. It does make you think, where's the line between individual freedom and the good of everyone?
Right. That's the big question. And then the author brings in this whole other layer, talking about cities. They describe cities as being historically like centers of degeneracy and immorality.
Yeah, that's a pretty harsh view.
Yeah.
Kind of echoes some old stereotypes about urban environments, don't you think?
Yeah.
Cities have always been places where, like, social norms are challenged and culture evolves. But they've also been, incredible drivers of progress. Like, think about all the innovation and creativity that comes out of cities.
That's a good point. But the author connects this idea about cities and like moral decay to the idea that city life makes people feel rootless. Like, they say it creates a sense of isolation that leads to apathy and a decline in like community values and national identity.
Yeah, I see where they're going with that. It's this idea that cities can lead to a breakdown of traditional values and that people become alienated.
Exactly. And then this is where it gets even more interesting. The author argues that all this like feeling disenfranchised actually makes people in cities more politically active.
Oh, wow.
Like, they become this powerful voting bloc that can, impose their will on people in rural areas who maybe aren't as politically engaged.
So they're saying that the city itself, like, shapes people's politics.
Yeah. Like the anonymity and the constant change you find in a city, they think it creates a certain kind of mindset.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I mean, there's so much diversity of political thought in any city.
Yeah, for sure. But then the author goes on to talk about how democracy, with its core belief in equality, keeps expanding. They say we're always creating new rights and freedoms.
Right.
And, well, they see this as a problem.
Ooh, okay. So they bring up a really big question here. Can a system that's all about individual rights and equality also maintain a strong sense of national identity and, like shared values?
Yeah.
I mean, they seem to think those things just don't go together.
Exactly. They argue that as we expand rights, it actually weakens our morality and our national identity because it includes more people who they believe don't like truly care about the nation's well-being.
That's a tough one. Because on the one hand, extending rights and getting more people involved in politics, that's generally seen as a good thing. Like, it moves us toward a more just society.
Yeah.
But this author's raising a really important point, too, about whether that can lead to, like, diluting the things that bind us together as a nation.
Yeah, it's a really complex issue. It makes you think about the balance between individual rights and the needs of the country as a whole.
For sure. And how democracies navigate that tension is something they've been dealing with for a long time. It's definitely something to think about.
Definitely.
And then they connect this whole democratic mindset, that's what they call it, with a liberal mindset.
Yeah.
That they think wants to, like, get rid of traditional ideas about nation, culture, race, religion, all of that.
So they're basically saying any differences between people are a problem.
Kind of, yeah. Like, it goes against their idea of, like, total equality, which they see as the main force behind democracy.
Okay. But they don't really give much evidence for that.
No, not really. And I think a lot of people would say a strong democracy needs different viewpoints and, lots of debate, even if it means disagreeing about culture and stuff.
Right. Plus, the author is using liberal to mean a very specific thing. It might not be what everyone thinks of when they hear that word.
Sure.
But anyway, they go on to say that anyone who disagrees with this liberal agenda, they're seen as like betraying democracy itself.
Like there's some kind of rule that you have to agree with whatever's popular.
Yeah, something like that. And they bring up things like hate speech laws and how people are suspicious of patriotism now.
So basically, they're saying that having strong beliefs or feeling connected to a certain group is becoming like a bad thing in this democratic mindset.
Exactly.
It's like they're describing this future where you can't say anything that goes against the norm or you'll be like censored.
Yeah.
But I mean, free speech is a huge part of most democracies.
Right. And we're always having debates about where the line is between protecting free speech and, stopping harmful stuff.
Exactly. So it's not just about silencing anyone who disagrees.
It seems like the author is kind of mixing up those concerns about free speech with a bigger worry about how culture is changing.
Yeah, good point. And this ties back to what they were saying before about, more rights for more people. They think that's weakening society somehow.
Right, like by trying to include everyone, democracy is losing its identity or purpose, and they seem really worried about traditional values disappearing and like morality changing.
And they connect that back to cities growing, which they see as the center of this shift away from those values.
Yep, they keep going back to that idea that cities create people who are like disconnected from tradition and more focused on themselves and getting power.
It's like that old debate about whether cities are good or bad for morals.
Totally. It's easy to romanticize rural areas and forget that they have their own problems too. Plus, cities are so diverse.
Exactly. You can't just say all city dwellers are the same.
And it's interesting how the author contrasts democracy with this like idealized monarchy. They think monarchs are less likely to take away our freedoms.
Because they're not trying to get elected.
Yeah. And they think monarchs just like inherently understand where the limits of their power are.
It definitely goes against how we usually think about power and authority.
Right. But let's not forget, history is full of monarchs who totally abuse their power.
Oh, for sure. It's not like they were all perfect.
So this author's perspective is, well, it makes you think, but it's important to remember what actually happened in the past,
Definitely. It's good to think about different systems, but you have to be realistic about how things really work.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to, keep in mind as we go forward. It's wild how the author connects all this stuff together, right? Like expanding rights and traditional values disappearing and, cities and this whole idea of how democracies think.
It's a lot, yeah. And it might sound kind of doom and gloom to some people, but they are making us think about some big questions, like how do we have freedom, but also like keep society together?
That seems to be the main thing they're worried about. Like those two things just don't work anymore.
Yeah, like they can't both exist.
Right.
And they blame it on, too much focus on individual rights and morals changing.
They even say something like we've agreed to destroy ourselves, basically,
What?
by buying into this whole way that democracies think, which they say is ruining the basis of society.
It's a pretty extreme take, for sure. But it does make you wonder about the future, right? Like, are we giving up too much for freedom?
That's what they want us to think about. And it's not like there's an easy answer, but at least they're getting us to think about these, compromises we make in a democracy.
Definitely. And we might not agree with everything they say or how they say it, but these are important ideas to, wrestle with. It helps us understand what democracy is and how it can go wrong.
Yeah, it reminds us that democracy isn't just like set in stone. It changes, right? It has to deal with new stuff all the time and include different people.
Right. And part of that means figuring out how to balance individual rights with what's good for everybody.
Exactly. So, I mean, this deep dive has taken us to some weird places and maybe even some scary ones. But I think we end up with a better idea of how complicated democracy is and how important it is to think critically and, talk about these things.
I agree. It shows that democracy isn't just something you watch, You got to participate, be willing to hear different opinions, and try to find common ground.
And sometimes you have to ask those tough questions and think about stuff that makes you uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's how we learn and grow, right? How we make democracy stronger and more fair for everyone.
This has definitely been a deep dive, lots to think about, even after we're done. It's been really interesting tackling these big, complicated topics.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everyone listening has too. And, learn something new along the way.
So until next time, keep thinking critically, everyone.